All right, all right. And welcome back, guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. What are we talking about today? Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you guys for coming to the webinar October. That is actually the day I am recording this. I got that here in a few hours. Gonna hit some solo episodes in the time in between. But I do want to thank you because right now we are sitting right over 100 invitees, confirmed attendance, etc. Really pumped. I know I haven't done the webinars in a bit. And, frankly, I did them December last year all the way through March. And then just with the uptick in wanting to have some continuity with scaling, obviously the podcast, but then doing a lot of guest appearances on other people's podcasts. The webinars took a back seat, but that was something that a couple months ago, I had good uptick in inquiries regarding whether or not I was going to bring those back. And it occurred to me at the beginning of October, I was like, well, that's such a free, such an easy, just no sweat off my back value add. And definitely something that I feel like for the individuals who are kind of on the cusp of hey, I'm tune into all your content, watch Patreon, I'm on tier 3, I'm getting those 4 bonus episodes a month, not in a position where I either can afford coaching or I necessarily need it, which, hey, respect. How can I continue furthering my education? I think the webinars are a great option for you. I think there's something that, frankly, you can get a lot out of them. And if you do, have an interest in, potentially taking your physique endeavors to the next level, I think they can be really, really useful. Come in, take notes. They're free. I've done them paid in the past. It's simply hey, for the individuals who are looking for more advanced content, and throughout them, if you've attended, you already know, I'm kind of giving you my blueprint. I'm kind of walking you through my step-by-step guide, depending on the topic. But in this past one, we covered how to get stage lean, which I think is something that, frankly, a lot of people, gosh, now it's going to be in my head. I know one of the guys commented last podcast. He's like, yo, take a shot every time she says, frankly. I'm going to work on it. I got a few of those filler words that they are prominent. Okay. And train of thought. I think when it comes down to it, the ability to get to low body fat levels, that shouldn't be something that is necessarily a hidden secret. There really shouldn't be a lot of gatekeeping on how to continue to diet someone. And yes, there's obviously deviance based on the individual, based on the context, going into the prep or the extreme fat loss phase. But I do think that there should be some kind of framework that you can follow, a principles-based approach. And that's really what my goal is with this webinar, is to walk you through the meat and potatoes of really how to get stage lean, how to get as lean as you want to be. If you want to get too lean, if you are under muscled, you're I'm in order to do this show, I'm going to really have to dig, I'm going to have to push. And if that's the case, you're going to have to overshoot on the conditioning side. Okay, well, here is your blueprint. Here's your guide. So if you missed out on that, this solo episode, this should be coming out let me see, sometime in November. We've scaled it up to now we're doing the 6 episodes a month, 2 guests, 4 solos. I'm getting a little bit ahead because I will have a new family member hopefully here in the next month, and that is going to put me on the road, probably not recording the podcast for a few weeks. So just want to make sure there is not a lapse in media. But what are we talking about today? I think actually that is a really good segue into today's topic, which is my A to Z guide on staying on plan, or staying on some semblance of a plan while traveling. And this is one of those things, I'm hesitant to say hey, you cannot miss a beat in all circumstances, because frankly, I think that there's going to be a lot of you who are I don't want any regression in progress. And really, I hope that, my goal with walking through these tips, these tricks, is that I can give you a better idea of how to approach setting expectations for when you do travel, but then also executing so that you can come back and not feel like a total piece of shit. So when it comes to actually traveling, going on vacation, whether it's personal and professional, hey, in my case, like I'm going to be going at the drop of a hat when my sister has her third baby. So exciting. And I'm going to be helping out, watching two little boys. So freaking cute, so adorable. I'm so excited for this. But yeah, I mean, like she's probably going to call me and be like, hey, I need you to get on a plane tonight or as soon as you can, and just kind of pick up and come and stay for like 5, maybe even 7 days, maybe a little longer. And this is one of those things that I think for the most part, I would say this year, I've had a lot of foresight into my travel plans for most of the trips, but there have been a lot of trips like the one I'm anticipating this next month where it's kind of just like, hey, a few days before, when I was in Tampa with Jordan and the Prescript gang, I had the opportunity to record with Larry Wheels, and he actually flew me back out from Tampa to Ontario, so to California, and it was just like literally a 1-day flight. It was like, hey, I'll bring you out here, and I flew in that night, flew out immediately after recording the podcast, so it was very, very quick. The trip to Tampa, that's another good example. Like that was one Jordan and I went from California, from San Jose to Vegas for a few days, and then from there to Tampa for about 2.5 weeks. I mean, like a good chunk of time completely out of, my environment, home turf, and a lot of ambiguity too. And I think that isn't going to be the norm for most people, but if that is the norm, there are definitely some of these tips and tricks that you can apply the next time that you find yourself in that position. And I would say the more foresight you have, the more you can plan going, into these vacations, just whatever outings, the better off you're going to be. And really, I think it just comes down to first understanding what is realistic in terms of your execution. So in my case, going to Texas, I'm playing mom while my sister is delivering. I have Jordan with me, so it'll be fun. But it's gonna be me, my mom, Jordan, and we're watching 2 kids, 2 and 5-year-old, and it's like, okay, focus is not going to be on necessarily meal timing or getting in workouts. And this is something that, like, a lot of you guys listening, you probably have kids, because that is the feedback that I hear within the comments and within the messages. You already have a system in place, but at the end of the day, like, it does come down to like caring for your young ones. In the case where you are traveling with someone else, I mean, like, it very much might be out of your hands as far as like accessibility to the gym, ability to, have total control over your meals. And maybe it's just you and a partner. In that case, it's like, okay, well, you can still coordinate, but you still like have to be somewhat mindful. It's like not completely about you, probably. But really, it comes down to you need to have clear expectations that are aligned honestly with what you're willing to do and what you're willing to forego. The forego part, that part is probably the most important thing that I want you to take away from this. Because very quickly, I think without a plan, you cannot just undo some of your progress that you've made henceforth, on, or I guess thus far on your plan, assuming you're in fat loss phase, but you can undo nearly all of your progress. And I'm speaking from personal experience, like, gosh, early day Corey, like I was a little shithead with like traveling and like eating out. And I mean, it came down to like, I was really disordered and I didn't really understand balance when it came to food. And like my just orientation around food was very much about consumption and not necessarily about experience, which I have several episodes on that. So if that's something you want to take a look at, I mean, like, you can definitely browse through different podcast episodes, but really you need to understand, like, or you need to identify when you come back home, how do you want to feel? Because I've been that person who's come back from a trip and I'm like, I do not want to get on the scale for like multiple days. Like I want to just starve myself like 1 or 2 days, like just very heavily under eat, do a ton of cardio. And then at that point I'll check the scale weight and hopefully I won't be any heavier than I was when I left. Now, this idea, like I guess reference point, if that's been you in the past, which it certainly has been me years ago, I took more of a, cavalier approach where I would go on trips and I would just be like, fuck it. Like, it's an excuse. And I didn't really take a lot of personal responsibility around food behaviors because I just blamed it on, well, I'm traveling, so I have no control over anything. And it's understandable. Like, this isn't me shitting on myself. Like, I know why I did that. I just I didn't realize how much control I actually had over, my decisions when it came to food. And I didn't want that responsibility because that responsibility is hard. I mean, like, that is heavy. And you can pretty much trace back anytime you get on the scale and like you see that you're at a heavier, set point, you can pretty much work your way backwards to every decision you've made around food or exercise. And it can completely add up. Like, the math will math, because whether or not you track your calories, whether or not you are honest with yourself, because we love to lie to ourselves, your body will keep a very accurate inventory on the calories that go in and the calories that you burn. Now, one thing I want to say, actually there's 1,000 things I want to say, but one thing I will say right now, getting away from like the ambiguity with like, I want to be smart, I want to eat healthy, and that being like a goal you set, like that can be a starting point, and that can be the umbrella is like, okay, like that maybe is like your first introductory, like, do you want to eat like an asshole or do you not want to eat like an asshole? And that's like really the first decision I would make. There's some trips I've gone on and I've been like, I'm going to indulge. I'm going to probably come back a little bit higher body fat than I left. And I accept that. I take on that responsibility. God, you know how freeing it is to do that? You know how nice it is just to be like, this was intended. This was not a surprise. Like, I knew going into this, I take ownership for my actions. That is so superior than coming back and living in this, like, I don't know, this fantasy of like, I have no idea how this body fat accrued. I was so strict. Were you? If you're going in with the mindset that you're going to be prepared to resist temptations, you need to very, very clearly identify what you plan to do. If once you're there, you don't have the willpower, because it's not just a matter of what you're going to do in a reactionary approach. It's more important, I would say equally, but probably more important, that you figure out what you're not going to do and like set very clear parameters. Like, I like to make things simple. When I travel, I start by laying out as clearly as I can what would need to happen, like what's the worst I could do on this trip. And like when we went to Tampa, like Jordan and I had just started dating like a few months before that, and like he's super supportive, and we're in an environment where everyone's gonna like meal prep probably anyway, but it's still like, we're gonna go out to eat, we're going to have variable training times, and like I didn't have a car, so I was like, okay, like we're not walking distance to the gym, like yes I could Uber, but like I want to be just cognizant fiscally around this. And I went in and I'm like, okay, like I know exactly, based on past fuck ups, I know exactly what would need to happen for me to come back and be like 5-10 pounds heavier. And for me, you don't have to do this, but like I find it really helpful to actually go in and be like, okay, here is my current maintenance right now based on the cardio I'm doing, based on, body mass generally. I would have to eat 500 calories over my maintenance every single day to gain 1 pound of body fat. So I have to think back, okay, like how many days do you realistically think you're going to go out to eat? I was gone for like 2.5 weeks. I was like, we're going to have multiple untracked meals. So like those in my mind are all opportunities for me easily to get in like 1,000 calories to 1,500 calories if I'm not careful, because I do have a big appetite. Like I do like eating food that's calorically dense, that's highly palatable. And I'm not someone who is like, oh, I'm gonna go and like not eat. Like I do think in this setting it'd be like kind of fucking rude. But I knew going into it, I'm like, there's gonna be a lot of opportunity to overindulge. So I thought about it and I'm like, okay, so let's say I have like 10 to 14 potential opportunities for me to overshoot with food, like meals that are going to be hard to track. What does that look like then for those meals that I can track? So when we go to Chipotle, when we didn't go to Starbucks to get breakfast, but if you go to Starbucks and get like I don't know, egg white mix, whatever. So it's like, there are going to be meals that are easy to track and meals that are very hard to track. Depending on the ratio of those meals, that should honestly determine how strict you need to be on those trackable meals and how cognizant you need to be of your output, because we've really got two parts of the equation that determine if you come back heavier or lighter. We've got the input and the output. That is going to result in either a net positive, so a surplus, a net negative, a deficit, or net zero. You came back roughly the same. Now, you need to start by asking these questions. How do you want to feel when you return? What's an acceptable amount of loss? And when I say loss, I don't mean like how much fat do you want to lose? Like how much progress do you want to make while you're away? I mean like you are losing progress. I would not go into any like extended stay vacation or even short vacation where you know you're going to not be extremely strict. I would go in and be like, okay, this vacation I'm probably going to sacrifice productivity, meaning how much progress during the trip are you willing to accept you are not going to make? So I'll tell you a story. For instance, I went to Tulum on like a honeymoon with people that had gotten married. I was like tagging along with my boyfriend at the time. And it was really like, I mean, I love Tulum. It's fun. Exactly like where I would want to be at that point in my life. But I was in contest prep and this was going to fall like at that 7 to 6 weeks out period, which honestly was more like my 4-week out period, because that was the point in which I was like, I want to be stage ready 2 weeks out. And I was like, motherfucker, like, I don't want to go. Like, I'm going to go, but this is like really not ideal. And I went into that and I'm like, I am going to have to honestly probably stress to not lose progress while away. And because I don't want to move my shows back any further, because I was timing them around when I was going to start clinicals with nursing school, I was like, honestly, I think it makes the most sense for me to go in and be like, I cannot sacrifice any progress while away, because this goal to me is more important than just indulging in very brief stints. Because frankly, even if I had indulged, there were probably going to be more calories than I was anticipating. And I couldn't really come back. And I was on such a good trajectory in my prep too. And that was really like why I wanted to make sure I didn't take any steps back, because I was like, I've done so well with this prep thus far. I don't want to fuck it up because of like a 7-day trip. I forget how long we went. I think it was like 5 to 7 days, but okay. Third question. How much control do I have over my actions and my environment? And for example, like I had a client a few weeks ago who she went on a trip to Belgium and she was without a gym, without a refrigerator for 2 weeks. And she was also strapped for time while away. Like this was a work trip. So she's like, I'm going to probably be working like an actual 8 to 10 hours, like not leaving the building. Probably not going to work out after those long days. So this is an example of someone who like doesn't have a lot of control. Whereas like when I went to Tulum, I mean, I was with, people like I kind of knew, and like, my boyfriend. So I was like, oh, okay, I can like speak up for myself and I can just go to these meals and like not eat. I can always like carve out time like separately to get an activity. But in the case like you're going and you don't have the ability to pick your gym timing, and like, let's say you do have obligations that are non-negotiables. Okay, well then like you might have to accept, based on the control over your actions in your environment, maybe you're going to have to sacrifice some progress. And fourth question, how ready do you feel to decline food, drinks, etc., anything that's going to steer you away from your goals? So I'm gonna try to think back. Like Jordan and I, we went to Texas maybe like 10 days ago, and going into it, like we've like mapped out pretty clear like performance goals. So I was like, we're going to be gone for 4 days. Training's going to probably be affected the day after. So it's like 5 days of fucked training. And I asked him, I'm like, is this something that like you really like, how important is it to you for us to work out while you're there? And he was honestly like, yo, like we're meeting your family for the first time. I don't want to make it about our training goals. Like if you want to go, cool. But like, I'm very much okay with taking that time off, which sick, major points there. But with this, like, I kind of went into that conversation with him around like, if he was like, I really want to train on these days, even if it's like a push session, like it's understandable. I want to respect that. And I was kind of like in the mix of like, if he would like to continue training while we're there, cool. If he doesn't, I'm not going to force it. I'm going to spend time with my family because I haven't been home in a long time, and I really do want to soak up as much time as I can with them because I'm only going to be there for a few days. So another example is I had a client who, we were like 2 weeks into our coaching term, and she emails me saying, my husband, they've been married for so long. He surprised me with a weekend getaway, which she's like, this is pretty rare. Like, he's not the best at surprising me. Usually like he's not able to pull it off. And in this case, she like felt really bad. And he was even like, oh, like, do you still want to go? And I was like, dude, no, like, that's super sweet. Like, I think you should honor like the fact that this is obviously, this was an anniversary trip. Like, you need to honor this relationship and the efforts that he put forth. And like, it's like a few days, like, you're going to be fine. Even if you come back a little bit heavier, I know it's not ideal and it's not something that like you anticipated, but we ended up game planning, and all in all, just understanding like she was going to be present. She was going to focus on the experience, and that she was comfortable doing damage control after, but intentionally she wasn't going to overindulge. And like, we did keep it a little more ambiguous, but it was very clear going into it, like, hey, I'm not going to decline these indulgent meals, and I'm probably going to have some drinks, and I'm going to focus on just the experience itself, which I think overall was absolutely the best call. And I think, in my experience, the number one predictor for someone's success in traveling while working towards any goal is being honest about how they plan or how they can predict they'll make decisions once they're away. Another example, I had a girl, brand new client. She checked in today and she's like, hey, literally week 1 is complete. I'm on week 2. I ended up having a conference that I typically would like stay at like a hotel because I know that they're going to have a gym. I trusted a colleague to book the accommodations. We're staying in an Airbnb. It's not really feasible for me to go back and forth, just with the Uber and like the schedule and stuff. How do you recommend I go about like approaching just these days that I'm going to have off training? So it'd be like 3 days, which like that's not ideal, but like it just taking the accountability and being very honest up front. Like, I'm not going to set myself up to be like, oh, I hope I train. It's like realistically we know the chance of her training is just not going to be very high. And really, I think with this guide, like this episode is supposed to be this guide. This is an intangible, I guess, in some ways. I'm hoping that at least you can take some of these tips, tricks, thoughts, considerations, and it'll allow you to mitigate a loss in productivity while you're away from your home, aka your ideal environment where executing your goals should be as seamless as possible. So first thing, training adjustments prior to travel. This is a big one. Like on the trip I went to Texas, I made sure, I was like, okay, like we're going to be gone for 5 days, realistically, probably not going to train while we're away. So because of that, like I made sure leading up to the trip, I was like, I want to bury myself in training volume. Like I want to really push on my isolation work. I want to make sure that like I need those rest days. So like, in actuality, like the workout I had, I think right before we left, I was like, okay, full send. I was like really diligent. I, went into the workout. I was not having it. Like, my body was just still under recovered from the previous session. But typically what I recommend for most people is to try to overextend themselves, specifically on isolation work. So I'm not saying add an additional set to your squats or your RDLs. I'm saying for the movements that have a lot of external bracing, you could absolutely add an intensifier or several intensifiers, like talking about leg press, leg extension, hamstring curl, abductions, cable kickbacks. Like these are all ones that are going to be not as systemically fatiguing as, let's say, a squat. If you have the ability to add like an additional set to a squat, I'd kind of question whether or not you're sandbagging in your training to begin with. But if you have the ability to do that, or even an intensifier, that still is an option. And the idea is just being like, put yourself in a position where those rest days are actually necessitated. Now, 2, structuring your workouts by fatigue. Now, this is more like while you're traveling, on the days, and in this, I guess, like, let me back up. While traveling, I would have specific days. So I would have days that you're flying, days that you're in the car for an extended period of time. Those would be days where like absolutely you're probably not going to train. Now, maybe there's a slight like possibility, like Jordan flew to Toronto today. He fucking got no sleep last night. He's going to be exhausted by the time he gets there. But if he has some caffeine, I know he may consider doing like a push or a pull workout that is, not going to be the best workout. It's going to be kind of junk, but it's still going to be some movement. And maybe that's what's going to allow him to feel better. For most people, I would say that's not a good idea. And for myself, like unless there's an actual reason that you need to have that stimulus, I'd probably just recommend chalking that day up to a rest day. Same thing with flying back home. When we flew back from Texas, we had a pretty early flight, but it wasn't unreasonable. We went to sleep pretty early the night before because, having kids, most parents are going to sleep pretty early, so allowed us to go to sleep pretty early. We got back to LA, I think it was like 10:30. We were at the gym by like 1, so we were able to get in food, able to stretch out a little bit. We both felt like shit, and it was not a good workout, but it was like, okay, this is going to be like the shake off the rust workout, but it's not going to be one that like I necessarily have high expectations for. Like it needs to happen because whether it happens today or tomorrow, it's just going to be a little bit of a shock to the system. Not a lot of productivity even needs to happen in the session, but a big key component here is adjusting expectations so that, and this was very difficult for me to do at one point, now it's just kind of like, whatever, fuck it, this workout's not going to be good. I can either make it worse by having a bad attitude, or I can just get it over with because it needs to happen. Going back to structuring your workouts by fatigue. So once you have the days that are absolute rest days, probably your travel days, then I would look at if you're gone for, let's say 10 days, traveling 2 of those days, that means you have 8 days left. Okay, so 4 of these days, I would say pick the best 4 days that you have the likelihood of the best workout. These could be days that like maybe you're gonna have a higher calorie meal the day before. Maybe you have a light workload. Maybe if you're just traveling for vacation, you're not gonna be like walking, 15, 20,000 steps. Just pick these days that are like, okay, the most optimal. And like those are gonna be your workouts that you need to devote the most physical capacity to. Now I would say for most people, this is going to be their lower workouts. They're going to probably be the most systemically fatiguing. But, in the case, let's say you feel really good, you're in between lower days, maybe it is like a really heavy pull day. Now, the other 4 days in this scenario where you have 8 days of like actually being there, not traveling, 10 days of totally traveling, maybe those other 4 days are like, hey, I might not train on these days. And if I do train, they're not going to be great workouts, but they're going to still occur. And those can be workouts, even if you have a lower day that falls in between those sessions. Maybe it is like your leg seat, which essentially now I've just coined as like, it's still my leg day. It's still a day where I do some kind of RDL modality, some kind of split squat. I'm doing some kind of leg press. But I just know the intention is like, it's not going to be a full send. It's going to be like a baby send, like just a little send. The focus isn't really even to hit RIR 1 to 2. It is to get the volume ensure in lieu of intensity. Maybe higher volume would make sense, but still within the constraints of something that I can recover from. So the other thing that I think is it's a little baffling, but that's where I don't want this to come across like it's like, oh, how do you not know this? But I think a lot of people underestimate the accessibility to gyms. So I mean, like, yes, if you have the ability to book your accommodations in advance, like you should absolutely plan and be like, hey, I want to stay at a hotel or near a gym just in some sort that I could walk to. If you can, that'd be amazing. But in the case that you're like, okay, the hotel I'm staying at, the Airbnb I'm staying at, not local to a gym, or not like, I don't know, doesn't have a gym in the hotel or doesn't have a gym within walking distance, literally just Google, just find a gym relatively close by. It doesn't need to be like, you don't have to vet the gym to the extent of like, do you have all the machines that I need? Like, just fucking go and do a workout, do a lower workout, like do your best, and like, just make the most of what tools you have accessible. Okay. I think oftentimes people just like have in their mind, well, if it's not the same gym, it's going to be more stress here. And yes, it does take more work to, kind of parse through and like figure out, okay, like what exercises do I need to make substitutions for? But again, something is better than nothing. So again, just make this a priority. And I would even say in the case, like my client who went to Europe for, 2 weeks, training isn't an option because like where she's staying, she's like, there's no way, like the closest gym is going to be 2 hours. So I set her up. I was like, hey, go buy some bands on Amazon. Like, you don't need a lot, but like there is still some movement and activity you can get in. I would really say though, when we're talking about like activity as a whole, the thing that's going to put fat loss at bay is going to be cardio. So I mean, like in her case, she doesn't have access to cardio machines. I'm like, I want you to aim for like 5,000 to 7,000 steps at least by midday. And like, this could be tough because she's working. So I'm like, if that means like you have to get up an hour earlier to just go on like a 60-minute walk, like realistically, you can get in about 6,000 steps in 60 minutes. And if you are to even just like take I don't know, set a reminder, tell Siri, be like, hey, at noon, I need to check my step count in my health app on my iPhone, because majority of people probably have iPhones. If you don't, it just, hey, like any kind of step tracker that you have, it's like, take a look at it, take a peek around midday. And if you're at 1,000 or 2,000, okay, you got some making up to do. If you fall behind, honestly, the solution could be as simple as just saying, hey, before we go to dinner, can we go walk around for like 30, 40 minutes? I'm a big fan of saying like, when we go, so like when Jordan and I travel, like we're typically going out to get like coffee or something like that. And I'm like, okay, every time we leave, if we go to get coffee or a meal, I'm like, I want to walk a little bit before and a little bit after, and him as well. So it's one of those things, like he's pretty on top of having a high step counter, just staying active, especially while away. But if you do that, if you walk, let's say, what was I going to say? If you do 1,000 steps before every meal and 1,000 steps after every meal, that's 6,000 steps in totality. So it's like, you can do that pretty reasonably. And then if you don't move the rest of the day, that's okay. Like, you're still hitting a decent amount. So you're still hitting probably more than I'm going to hit today. Now, realistically, should you hit like 10 to 15,000? I mean, it depends. It depends on what the constraints are. It depends on if you can train. It depends on how much you're going to be walking the other days. It depends on if you had 25,000 steps the day before. Depends on what kind of phase you're in. But I think even just having like the cognition of like, hey, I need to prioritize this, I think this can be really helpful. Okay, so let's get into nutrition. Now, when traveling, I would make it a priority to get protein in during the first few meals. And if your goal is 150 grams of protein per day, don't sweat it and be like, okay, like I need to break this up into 20, 30 gram increments. Like, if you can, amazing. But I would say like minimally, in 3 meals, aim to get in 40 to 50 grams. And this might mean ordering extra in addition to whatever your normal meal is. Like, it's not weird. Like, we live in a day and age where it's like, you know, whatever, just like, don't focus so much on like what other people think. Like, if you're literally you're at a McDonald's, it's like, get 2 of the egg white McMuffin things and like, just work with that. Get a second chicken breast. Like, you can do things that definitely will serve at least getting in your protein in. And I know it might seem like, well, I have to think about this the entirety of each day. Well, yeah. And I would say like, even if you fall short on carbs and fats, like that's okay. Like, be a little more flexible with like, okay, try to get in at least 40 grams fat, which should be pretty easy if you're going out to eat at any point throughout the day. But with the carbs, you can be a little bit more variable with them. Protein is something that's going to be harder to hit regularly, and you're probably going to be underserved in terms of like actual serving size. So I think if you can get ahead of it, and that's where like when we went to Vegas before the Tampa trip, like we had a super early flight. We both had a Fairlife. Like, I had 26 grams, he had 42 before we even, like, it was like 4:30 in the morning or something ridiculous. Had that, got on the plane, got another Fairlife for the trip. By the time we got to Vegas, we were both about like, I think I was like 60 grams of protein in because I had like other snacks too. But Jordan was about 120 grams in. And that was like at 11 a.m. in the morning. And at that point, it's like, okay, so he's hitting like 300 grams. I'm hitting like 150. So we're already in a position where we don't really have to think about it heavily the rest of the day. Because even if we just have 1 or 2 more meals, well, in his case, he does have to think about it heavily. In my case, I'm like, I only need a little bit more. Now, that's kind of the place I want to be in with all of these levers, like all of these variables, including, water, training. Like I just want to have it pre-planned and be in a position where it takes less planning when I'm actually more fatigued and willpower is lower. So I think if you can, one, pre-plan how many meals you're going to have, divide your protein goal across these meals to avoid playing catch up later in the day, they're going to be a lot better off for it. In terms of like protein focused like snacks and stuff, that's something I would like generally just be mindful of. Like, are you overdoing the fats to get protein in? Because like that's kind of counterproductive. Like at that point now, like, yeah, you're going over calories, and maybe in the case of someone who has a high intake. So if you're like Jordan, you're like, I need 4,000 calories or 4,300 calories to not lose weight. In that case, yeah, me have the higher fat thing. In my case, I'm like, I will blow through my 2,200 calorie budget, even when I'm building, I'll blow through that very quickly if I'm just like loading on all these additional fats in meals that like, frankly, like my focus is just the protein. So keep that in mind relative to the phase that you're in. And if you can't find protein rich snacks, it might be better just to fast or wait until your next meal where you can consume a leaner protein rather than overeating lower quality options or higher calorie options. Number 3, okay, pre-plan high calorie meals. So if you know that you have a high calorie meal coming up, this happened all the time when we were away. If you know that's going to be later in the day, okay, appetizer, dinner, dessert, maybe you're sharing a bunch of plates, stick to lighter meals and vegetables earlier in the day. So like, I know generally what I tend to eat is like, I will have an English muffin or a bagel. Bagels, much higher carb. I love adding like nut butter, cream cheese, even just straight butter to that. But I know like if we have a date night planned, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with the English muffin because that's a little bit lighter. Maybe instead of using 2 tablespoons of nut butter, I'm just going to use like 5 grams of cream cheese or 5 grams of just butter. Already, I'm like in more of a budgeting mindset. And I think if you can start the day with that attitude, it's going to put you ahead, or at least put you in a position where you're not going into that meal already kind of on the cusp of needing to be pretty rigid with foods that are going to be very difficult to track. I would also say like thinking about buildable meals, that's a really helpful way. So in the case where we know like we're going to eat out later in the day, but we're having something like Chipotle, I mean, like I do kind of eyeball it. I don't get crazy with it and like weigh out like, hey, how much rice did they give me? I'm just like, okay, this looks like more than 60 grams of carbs. So maybe I'm not going to finish it. Maybe I'm going to give it to Jordan. Maybe I'm going to save it for later. Just being honest generally and being a little more conservative with your calories throughout the day, that will set you up for a little bit more of a budget going into that final meal. Next thing. Okay. So segmenting your water intake for the day. Guys, I suck bad at getting in water, and like it's still like I've been doing this for so long and it's not something I enjoy doing. Frankly, I get nauseous like very quickly into drinking water, and like I just mentally I'm like, ugh, I don't want this. Takes the fun out of whatever I'm doing. It just feels like a chore. It doesn't have to feel good. It doesn't have to. And this is like the mentality that I've developed for myself. I'll drink tea, I'll drink Gatorade. As you've seen for the last 38 minutes, I've taken like 2 sips of these things. So when I get done recording this episode, I'm going to have to slam this so it's not 3 p.m. and I've had 1 liter of water. The thing that's allowed me to get in my water intake a little more easily is segmenting points throughout the day. So I chop my day into 4, or just different mile markers where I'm like, hey, how much water have I drank? Before I go work out, I need to have 2 liters of water in. That's just a rule that I've made for myself. While I'm working out, 20 ounces. That takes no effort. That literally you're working out, get off your phone, just like be in a mindset of like, okay, 1 sip of water in between each set. Like I promise you can do that. And if you're feeling ambitious, okay, 2 sips, 3 sips. Like we're literally just talking about gulps at this point, which like you do 20 ounces, you do 2 gulps. Okay, like easy. If you are finding that you're having frequent days, and this applies not to just traveling, but like if there are frequent occurrences where you're under your water intake, this is strictly a priority. Like this is strictly just not a priority to you. I'm talking to myself here. Like the days where I miss my water, it's because I didn't prioritize it. I have no excuse. Use downtimes while waiting for meals or coffee. So like whenever we go out, if we're at a sit down place, like, I mean, it's gonna be like 5 to 20 minutes before we get food in front of us. You can drink 10 ounces of water in that gap before you leave. make it just a thing, just like you are your parent. Okay. Like, hey, before we leave, I need you to drink your water. Like, however you need to coach yourself through it. It might sound silly, but these are the things that, as someone who sucks at this, like, this has allowed me to do better with a habit that is like historically always been hard and still kind of hard for me. When you go to get coffee, ask for one of the little, like, hey, can I get a cup for water? Anywhere you go, Chipotle, can I get a cup for water? Hit 2 or 3 cups of the smaller cups. It's easy. And if you can do this just habitually, I promise you're going to be further ahead, and you're not going to run into these long stretches where you're so far under your target intake. Okay, managing sleep, your sleep routine, prioritizing rest on high stress days. Okay, like some instances, you're not going to have a lot of control over this. I've had clients who travel very frequently, like every week they find that like I'm going to be on a plane going somewhere and probably do a different time zone. And in that case, like, yeah, you might need to take the additional rest days. So maybe it works in your favor to be more controlled with your food intake because your training output is not going to be as high or as consistent. But really, the more that you can consider your sleep routine and just consider like, hey, I got to be up at this time. I want to give myself whatever, like the amount of hours you feel good at. So for me, I feel good at 8. That means that like I want to give myself the ability to sleep 9 hours just on the off chance that I get shitty sleep or I can't fall asleep. That has been a real game changer. That's been something that like, since Jordan and I have been dating, I've been in a position where he loves his sleep. He's very good about his recovery score, and he's very in tune to like, hey, it's 9 o'clock. We both have to get up at 6. Okay. Like in the next hour, we should be at some point getting into bed and like trying to go to sleep. If you are with a partner who doesn't have the same sleep hygiene, be honest, nut up and just like tell them like, hey, I need to go to sleep. I was that person too who wouldn't speak up. I was the person who was like, oh, like I don't, it becomes like a hassle, and then they give me shit about it. Just, hey, just prioritize yourself. Like just make it important to you. And if it's not important to you, I mean, like it's going to affect so many of the things within your programming, but specifically when you're traveling, it's not going to make anything easier. Sleep mask, earplugs, white noise, even knowing in advance, like, hey, if you're going to a hotel, just like ask, hey, like, where does the sun come up and where is that relative to my room? And is it going to be blinding me? Do we have like curtains and shit that like block this out? If like you're going to a different time zone, just take the little bit of time to like inquire and just be like, hey, do I need to ask for a room change? I'm needy. Like I'll Instacart like some blackout curtains, or I'll just take like a blanket and I'll just like, it's not like I travel around with like nails or thumbtacks or anything, but it would be like, I'll just manufacture something to block out the sun if I must. Prioritize your sleep. Sometimes it's going to be better for you to take the extra recovery day, especially if you did not get enough sleep the night before. If stress is high, your schedule's packed, I'm going to say like more often than not, just go into this and be like, I'm probably not going to train today, but here are the conditions in which I would train. And maybe the conditions are, I'm not going to train at a gym. I'm going to make sure I go for a walk, or I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go for a hike, or whatever it is. But do listen to your body. Don't be afraid to adjust your workout schedule if needed. And really, honestly, I think the biggest thing that's helped me is staying flexible with expectations. So I've traveled a lot this year. Like in April, I think I had a total of like 15 trips, and over the course of March, April, and May, probably 15 trips. And throughout that time, like I went in and I was like, okay, I care about how I look is important to me, and I am okay with some untracked meals. But the thing that I can do is look at a meal and be reasonable and be like, hey, if I eat this entire meal, this is how it's going to make me feel acutely. But then also, if I do this repeatedly, if I do this 5 more times, this is what's going to show up on the scale. This is what's going to show up on my body. Now, like I remember when I went to Austin to record with Justin, like we went and had this like really bomb, like it was like a pub sandwich and like wings and stuff. And like that day I flew out that morning at like 6 a.m., flew back that night. I remember I had like some like Qdoba or something like that at the airport, but like, I mean, generally my food was in a surplus that day. But I made sure when we were out, I was like, I want to go enjoy myself. I haven't done like a true like ball out, like untracked meal in a bit. So I think this is okay. But that was one of those things. I don't think either Justin or I finished. I forget if we got 2 subs or we just split it, but like we had, oh yeah, we pizza, wings, subs. So straight, just like bar food. Neither of us finished all of the food. Like, I mean, yes, very indulgent fiscally, but we were like, it's just like we can enjoy the experience, but not need to eat it for consumption. And I think that's the thing I've probably changed in the last like year or two the most. And a big part of that's been because of Jordan, because how he is with food. But we go out so frequently, and in order to do that, that comes with at least the acknowledgement that like, if we were to eat just to consumption, what that's going to result in is a high degree of body fat gain, which ultimately is going to take away from the experience. So, and this isn't something I don't even think we've had like the conversation around this, but it's something that I've actively thought about is like, I want to be able to go do these things. Like if he wants to surprise me and like, you know, take me to Santa Cruz and be like, hey, like I have reservations here. And like, if he wants to do that and be like, we've got a nice dinner planned, let's go enjoy ourselves. I don't want that experience to be ruined or any like at all negatively impacted by after the fact, me being like, well, it was fun, but I overdid it. And now that like kind of leaves like a taste in my mouth, you know, metaphorically around going and having these untracked meals. And that's something that like separate from the relationship I've just made is like, I want to be able to enjoy food but not feel controlled by it. I don't want it to be something that I feel anxious going into these social events, or I feel like I can't control myself. And it was the same thing when we went to Tampa. It was like, okay, we went out to Burns twice. Like, I mean, like we went out literally as a group and like had a, you know, a whole like trolley of desserts. And like, that's something like even in that case, like very indulgent. Yes. But that's something that like, you know, you can tailor and you can really like curtail to become like, I'm going to enjoy this for the taste and experience, for being around, you know, friends and like enjoying like this moment. But I'm going to also recognize that like all of these foods have very high calorie, you know, profiles. So I think a lot of people get confused when they set out this target of like, I'm going to eat till I'm satisfied without recognizing how this looks in terms of palate fatigue, because there are a lot of foods that you can eat pretty aimlessly. Like we're talking like cereal, chips, fries, like sweets, cookies, like anything like that, candies, like they honestly, like you can eat well past the point of satisfaction. And really the only thing that's going to stop you is when your palate is like oversaturated with either sugar or salt. Now, I think when you're out to eat, like something that's allowed me to really enjoy the meals, but also stop when I'm like at the point where I'm satisfied, is thinking about like, okay, is this bite as good as the initial first bite? The first bite that I had of this dish, is this something that is bringing me that same satisfaction, that same enjoyment? And like, I mean, y'all are going to shit on me for this, so whatever, I'll take it on the chin. But like, if you look at something like Wagyu, like you need like 1 or 2 ounces before you're like, okay, enough. Like that's not something that you're just going to eat 6 or 10 ounces of. And if you do, you're probably going to feel like shit at a certain point. But like really rich foods like that, carrot cake, red velvet cake is another one that like, I mean, like carrot cake, I can do some damage on, so I'll take that back. But really what I'm getting at is like, if you can, one, focus on being present while you're eating these foods, specifically foods that are super high calorie and very highly palatable, I think you're going to be in a better position to kind of make that executive call. Like, is this bringing me the same joy as it did initially? And do I really need more of this? Like, how many bites would I have to eat before I tapped out? Now, I think if you can go into it with the mindset going into any kind of trip, vacation, you're like, okay, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but here are the things I'm going to do incredibly well. Now, for me, that's always going to be, I'm going to prioritize my hydration because I'm already bad about it when I'm in my home environment. So I know if I don't prioritize it while I'm away, very easily, I could go a whole day and probably have like a liter of water and not even bat an eye. Now, that's not where I want to be. So early in the day, I make sure I'm like, okay, if we're getting on a flight, I'm like, I'm going to slam water before we get in the Uber. If we get in the Uber, I'm going to, getting in the Uber, I'm going to bring a 20-ounce Gatorade with me. I'm going to chug that. Okay, I could be very well at this point 50 ounces in, get through TSA. If I have a refillable water or I buy water, okay, cool, another 20 ounces right there. By the time I board the plane, I'm at least 2 liters in. And this is something that like also does drive dopamine and makes me feel really good. There are other times I'm a little more flexible with like the food intake or even like what we're going to order. You know, if we go out to a restaurant and I know like I've never been there, Jordan's really excited about it, I might just give him full control and be like, hey, you order what looks good to you on the menu. I'll give you my input, as I see fit. But maybe the idea is to treat it more like a charcuterie and like enjoy the things that really stand out to me rather than just go in and be like, we're going to eat this to completion. I think it's also important to keep in mind too, like you are going on these trips and like specifically in the case where it's not work related, where it's like going home to see family, there are more important things than your fitness goals. Like you can still be diligent with your fitness goals, but it shouldn't be necessarily at the expense of like these experiences collectively. And it certainly shouldn't have like this negative impact on the people around you, big asterisk there. But in the case that like you can go and have some flexibility and kind of compromise and be like, these are the things I'm absolutely not going to slip up on. And then these are the areas that I'm going to be a little bit more relaxed with. And then from there, when you get back from your trip, you can kind of audit and be like, okay, how did this plan work? In theory, this is what I imagined happening. How practical was the strategy that I took? Did it allow me to stay on track to the extent that I wanted to? And the answer might very well be yes, it did, but next time I want to do better. And if that's the case, that's completely okay. That's where honestly, I would continue doing these reflections after you travel and really consider what are the ways that you want to do better next time. But I think it's important to disassociate from the tracking stress. If you're unable to track food, there is no use. There's no utility. And like, I get it. Like I'm that type A person, like I'm neurotic. I can be a dick to myself about like, oh, I really just want this to be perfect. But there needs to be some self-regulation and some management specifically around how much control you actually have over this. And is your frustration over not being able to track, is it actually worth it? Is it beneficial? Does it have any utility? Because I think in actuality, it typically doesn't. Stay objective, make the best choices that you can, and remember that small setbacks are better than giving up entirely. Something is absolutely better than nothing. And even if it doesn't pan out the way you were expecting, well, now it's an opportunity to learn. And if you can learn from it, that is a gift. By combining, I think these very practical approaches, I think you'll be able to stay on track better than you would otherwise. But you're back home. Okay, now what? What do? You reflect. Think about it for a couple days, but get back on track. Take your scale weight. If you haven't done check-ins, do a check-in. Take some pictures. Take your measurements. What worked well for you? Start journaling. Look at like what didn't work well. What would you change? But don't use this as an opportunity to, I'm just going to say be like over dramatic and be like just super shitty to yourself. Unless you're really disappointed with your efforts. In that case, don't be shitty to yourself. Learn from it. I hope this was helpful. I know a lot of you probably have trips coming up. If you have any specific questions for me, anything that, resonated with you from this episode, please leave it in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one.